Hey, welcome to Dialogue with the Daughters Live. During this is our second night, and during this live event, you will be able to meet and discuss episodes with the women of the Daughter Dialogues Oral History Podcast, Season 1. These women of color descend from men who fought in the Revolutionary War and have proven their lineage through membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution. My name is Risha Rainey. I am the host of Daughter Dialogues. Season 2 begins in February. New episodes are released every Thursday, so visit daughterdialogues.com to subscribe to the newsletter and meet more members of color. Follow us, go to social media, support us by following us at Daughter Dialogues on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And always keep in mind that this is not an official podcast or this is not an official event of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. This podcast and this event tonight is independent and does not necessarily reflect the views of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. Tonight, this webinar is not going to be your typical webinar where you listen to me post or ask the panelists a bunch of questions and you never get your question in. I've already asked them everything that I could possibly think of. This is your time. And we have some questions that people have already posed. I will start with that first. And we're going to assume that you've already listened to these podcast episodes. So we won't be repeating their stories. We'll do a brief introduction and then it will be time for your questions. Please all remember that this is a non-political discussion. And tonight's common thread, meaning the common story that runs between the four women you will talk with tonight, is patriots of color. Patriots of color. They all descend from a patriot of color who contributed to the fight for independence of the United States of America. And there's something that I want you to know, that there's a common assumption that's not correct. Most people assume that members of color or Black members of the Daughters of the American Revolution descend from a Black patriot. And actually, if you go on daughterdialogues.com and you filter the daughters, go to the tab that says daughters and filter by the patriot ethnicity, you will see that the majority of daughters of color descend from white patriots or white men, to be very precise. So tonight you're meeting a very small, special subgroup of women that are Black women in the DAR, and they also descend from patriots of color. There's not that many of them that I have identified, I should say, in my research so far. And remember, this discussion, it's not limited to just the common thread of patriots of color. You can ask them all types of questions, such as about their family backgrounds, their lineage, motherhood, careers, genealogy research, whatever you want to ask them tonight. This is your time. So now that I've done my brief introduction, I would like for you to now, they don't know that they're hidden and you can't see them. So now I will show their faces so you can see the awesome ladies of season 1 that descend from patriots of color. And now, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Daughter Dialogues, or Dialogue with the Daughters Live. We have with us tonight, as you can see, our panelists. I'd like to introduce them briefly. First, we will start with Alelia Bundles. And the title of her podcast episode was Madam C.J. Walker and a Family Legacy of Pioneers. She is the author of the biography that inspired Self-Made. This is the Netflix series about her great-great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, who was an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, an activist, and hair care industry pioneer. Alelia Bundles, in her episode, talks about her direct lineal descent from 2 Revolutionary War patriots through her biological grandmother, Fairy Mae Bryant, who was adopted by Alelia nee McWilliams Walker, the only daughter of Sarah Breedlove, also known as Madam C.J. Walker. And Alelia shares stories about her ancestors who descended from American Revolution soldier Ishmael Roberts, who were pioneers that migrated from North Carolina to Indiana and created free people of color settlements in the early 1800s. And she talks about her connection to her Revolutionary War patriot, Thomas Archer. Next, we have Dymond Bush, sports librarian, 10th generation Rhode Islander. And her title also include I Belong Here. Dymond is our youngest woman in the Daughter Dialogues study. She is in her late 20s and she discusses portraying Marian Anderson at 8 years old in a Black history production and then reconciling DAR's history of exclusion to join the DAR as a millennial. And her mixed race Spanish, Native American, and Black Revolutionary War patriot, Michael Anthony, who served in the 1st Integrated Regiment. And she also talks about serving as the regent, which is the leader of a DAR chapter. Next, we have Stephani Miller, and her title of her episode was Life Coach Exposing Falsified and Denied Oral Histories. Stephanie talks about how her Revolutionary War patriot, James Dew, was not Scottish, but instead a Black man living with a white woman, and proving that her ancestor, Vilmont Saysnader, was born to Norbert, who was a white man who had a child with a slave, which Norbert's descendants denied. She discusses working as a pediatric home care nurse, opening a group adult residential home with her mother and family, and running a supported living coaches, personal supports, and life skills business. And we have again back from last week, Joyce Mosley, and her title was Single Parent Adoption Pioneer, Early Philadelphia Prominence. Joyce was the first to adopt as a single parent in Philadelphia. She compiled a cohesive record of her family history tracing back to the 1600s and joined the Daughters of the American Revolution despite passing the grave of Marian Anderson when visiting family members who played with Marian that are buried in the same cemetery. Her Revolutionary War patriot, formerly enslaved Quaker Cyrus Bustle, who baked bread for troops at Valley Forge, and she talks about Cyrus bringing his enslaved mother to live with him and handwritten letters to his brother-in-law who still owned her at the time of her death. So welcome again, ladies. And so we will begin with the questions that were posed up front, submitted in advance. The first question is a pretty complicated one. There was likely an enslaved woman who tailored George Washington's Revolutionary War uniform and would qualify as a DAR patriot, but there are no records. And because there are no records, she does not qualify as a DAR patriot, and her descendants don't qualify for membership in the DAR. This same scenario is likely true for thousands of enslaved residents of the colonies in the late 1700s who supported the revolutionary cause with their labor. Recognizing this systemic inequality for descendants of color, should the DAR consider amending who it defines as a patriot and therefore who is eligible for the DAR in the current day? So, ladies, are you ready to meet the challenge of that question? We will start with Joyce Mosley, please.
That's a tough question. I think one of the things that could be proof, though, I know that in a lot of cases, if you go back and look through George Washington's records for his household, for the property he owned, she may be listed in something like that. That may be one possibility. DR changing their records or changing their qualifications, I don't know. To be legitimate, you've got to have the documentation. So I would think that it's unlikely that they would change their rules because they need to thoroughly document members in order to keep their reputation.
Alelia?
Well, is Betsy Ross in the DAR? I mean, I think that would be, is from working on things. I don't know. So I guess I would ask that. Are there other women who did things like that that qualify them? But I think Joyce is right. Changing the rules, there is that rigorous qualification process. So they may not change the rules if there's not documentation. I think that's pretty ironclad. But it would be interesting to see if there are women who were not soldiers who are in the DAR as a result of their own work during the Revolutionary War, as opposed to being a descendant of.
Stephani?
As Joyce said about using George Washington's list to see if she was listed as enslaved of his, I would also see what tailors were around there that could possibly have been used as for the uniforms. So maybe she might have been enslaved by one of the tailors there. And so she actually did work on uniforms. So they put her to a tailor. I think that might be a good way how to do it.
Dymond?
Yes, I don't think the DIR would necessarily have to change their rules regarding her. I think one of the qualifications is if somebody provided supplies, which she sort of did by tailoring their suit, so she could qualify as a patriot. And then, as Joyce said, just looking in George Washington's records, because he kept meticulous records, may be able to find her. Yeah, and then as far as the second part of the question, changing who would be eligible for DAR membership, in regards to her, I mean, there's a lot of other descendants who descend from other patriots of color, so I don't think it would necessarily affect eligibility.
Thank you, ladies. The second question, did you have to establish your ancestor, or were they already established? If you had to establish them, how did you do this? Is there a list of soldiers? So the question is basically, the Daughters of the American Revolution has a database of ancestors that are already known to have fought or contributed to the American Revolution. And this question is asking, was your ancestor already in the database, or did you have to, or on a list, or did you actually have to qualify them and say, this is a new patriot, as they would define it, and prove their service in contributing or fighting in the American Revolution? So we'll go backwards this time. I'll start with Dymond.
Yeah, so I did have to prove my patriot, Michael Anthony. So he was a new patriot. So to do this, actually, I used the DAR's Forgotten Patriots book, which was a study they did in the early 2000s. And it captured thousands of patriots of color. So in that book, I have actually 2 patriot ancestors which were listed. So I used information in that book to then go to the Rhode Island State Archives to pull my patriots records. And then using those records, that's what I submitted as proof for my application to prove Michael Anthony as a patriot. So now he's listed.
Alelia?
So my patriot was already listed, but I, as Risha knows, really did not know about my patriot until much later. And I learned about the connection because of a man named Coy Robbins, who had done a lot of research on the settlements, the free people of color settlements in Indiana. And he's the one who told me that I had a patriot. But then it was, a couple of decades before I tried to make the connection with the DAR.
Stephani?
Yes, my patriot is a new patriot. He was listed in the Maryland roster. He also had a pension. And he also was in the Forgotten African Americans also. So he left breadcrumbs for me to find him.
And I'll just interject that the women are referring to a publication called The Forgotten Patriots, which was published by the Daughters of the American Revolution. It is a free publication. It is available at dar.org, and it lists over 6,000 men and women of color who contributed to the American Revolution. And you can also find that publication, a link to it on daughterdialogues.com. If you click the resources tab, there's also a link there to the Forgotten Patriots publication. Joyce?
My Patriot Cyrus Bustle was also listed in the Forgotten Patriots, but he was not I had to go do the documentation. He did not fight. He was a Quaker, and so he didn't have a pension. He wasn't registered as a soldier, but instead, what I found was I had to go to the quartermaster reports. They were the organization responsible for providing food for the soldiers. And in those reports, he is one of the bakers that baked bread for George Washington's troops at Valley Forge. And that documentation was what I used to become a member of the DAR.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question is, how do you feel about daughters of color? How do you feel about those who think that daughters of color shouldn't celebrate their white patriots due to the assumed history of enslavement by their ancestors, and only patriots of color should be honored by descendants such as women of color as yourself? Again, most women that we have identified descended from white patriots, and you descend from a patriot of color. Do you think that that's more reason for you to be proud of your patriot? How do you feel about that particular, I guess, question? We'll start with Stephani.
Well, when I communicate with my white DNA cousins on Ancestry or 23andMe, I tell them that, hey, we have a common ancestor that's white. So his DNA is running through my veins. I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm not trying to romanticize their relationship, because most likely it wasn't mutual. I want to know about my family history. So I don't care if he was the slaveholder, if he was the slave catcher, if he was a patriot, or if he even was a president. They're still my ancestors, and I want to know the information. So yes, JJ should want to follow through with the Patriots.
Alelia?
Well, we cannot choose our ancestors. We are here despite them. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. But for me, it is about claiming the right to be in America and to say that I deserve to be treated as a full American, that, we are the real Americans. So that it always comes back to that for me, that we have been here, we have been participating, and we can't choose our ancestors, but we're here because of them.
Joyce?
Well, my ancestor is mixed race. His father was European, his mother was enslaved. And as far as I'm concerned, that's my family. And I am going to honor them by membership or by whatever I learn about them, because their DNA is my DNA.
Dymond?
So I don't think white patriots should be celebrated, but I do think that they should be recognized. I feel like hiding them only hides their misdeeds, because I don't think it could be a consensual relationship, producing the mixed race families back in the day. But I think that we should recognize them and recognize our place as their descendants. My mixed race patriot, I don't know who his parents were, but I do think that we should recognize who those patriots are, so that those deeds aren't hidden no longer in history.
Thank you. And I want to remind the attendees, if you have a question to direct to the panelists, please use the Q&A function. If you're using the chat, we aren't monitoring the chat. That's for attendees to converse with each other. Please use the Q&A if you want to submit a question directly to one of the panelists or all of the panelists. So now we have some rapid fire questions that I want to ask you. But before we do that, I want to take a quick poll to find out who's on here with us. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. The first one, you will see a question on your screen. Are you a member of the DAR? Pretty simple, yes or no. And let's see what we have as far as we'll know how to address our listeners and the makeup of the audience. We have about 75% have voted. Let's get a few more answers and then I'll end the polling and I will display the results. So we have about 86%. I think I'll stop it there and I will share the results. Look at that. It's just like last week. We have about half and half. It's a good split right down the middle. Welcome to all. We definitely enjoy having both members and non-members join us for this discussion. There's a second question. So my second question that I will ask is, I'm launching the polling now. You should see it on your screen. How are you affiliated with Dialogue with the Daughters? Do you personally know a panel? You can answer as many that apply. So this is not just one choice. This is multiple choice. Pick as many that apply to you. Do you know somebody that's on the panel? You're just kind of like their friend and hanging out to see them. Are you familiar with one of the panelists because you kind of communicate with them through maybe a genealogy group or otherwise? Are you a DAR member of color? Again, are you a DAR member? I know it's redundant from the last question. Are you working on joining the DAR? Or are you not affiliated at all? And you just love daughter dialogues and hearing the amazing oral histories of these women. 64% of you have voted. Let's get in a few more answers before I end the polling. We definitely love the outreach to both familiar and the unfamiliar. We definitely want to get the stories out to the public. So it's very exciting when people are joining us that have never heard this before. That's exciting. And also to have seasoned attendees to be able to add to the discussion. So we welcome everyone. So 86% have voted, same as last time. Let's end the polling and see what the results are. So I'm sharing the results. Look at this. We have a lot more people up here before than last time that are not familiar with these stories. I'm not affiliated and simply enjoy daughter dialogues. 28% of you, welcome. And then we have some seasoned and some friends and some familiar people here. So thank you everyone for participating in the poll. All right. So we're going to go to the rapid fire questions. And I will be focusing on one participant at a time. So I'm going to go to a different view. For the attendees, you're seeing that now I'm only on your screen. You'll see just the person I'm asking the questions of. First, we'll start with Alelia. So Alelia, first, before I go into all the rapid fire questions, I have one myself that I was so upset that I didn't ask you during the podcast. I wanted to ask you, you collect kaleidoscopes? What is like, I understand what a kaleidoscope is, but tell me about this. Why do you like them? Tell me about some of your kaleidoscopes.
Well, it's a childhood thing for many people. Those little, cheap kaleidoscopes with little pieces of plastic, but there are some really sophisticated artwork kinds of kaleidoscopes. And I started collecting them. I was working in Texas, and when you work in news, you don't get very many holidays. I had to do a Christmas shopping on the fly, and I went to a place called Olla Podrida. It was this interesting place with lots of craftsmen, and I found a kaleidoscope that was from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And that started me on my journey. And then I discovered that there's a whole society of kaleidoscope collectors. So I now have probably 40 or 50 kaleidoscopes. I haven't bought any recently because they're really expensive, the ones that I don't already have, but it's just something fun.
Wow, that's cool. Here's the question that came from, I am going to name her this time because she is a super fan, and this super fan follows and loves daughter dialogues. And she submitted rapid fire questions last time, and she came through and submitted them last minute. This time, Ann Tabus. We love you, Ann Tabus. Thank you. Lelia, were there any professional goals that you left on the table when you retired?
So, Anne, thank you for that. And I will tell you, I don't think I'm ever really going to retire. I did leave my corporate life more than a decade ago. And when I left ABC News, I think I had done everything that I wanted to do there. I'm still a news junkie, a journalism junkie, but the goals that I have had after that have all been part of a long-term my long-term interest in doing historical research and writing about my family. So I'm never going to retire. I just work for myself now.
Okay. Are you currently working on any new books, and
I
on
am.
what topic?
I am writing a biography on Madam Walker's daughter, Alelia Walker, and her life in Harlem during the 1920s.
How do you define patriotism?
Patriotism for me is loving your country enough to question it and to challenge it when it's not living up to its ideals.
You are an accomplished woman with impressive credentials. Are you active in your DAR chapter? How can your gifts contribute to the missions of DAR?
You know, I have to say I'm not really active, but it has been much easier to go to meetings this year with Zoom. And I have actually gone to a few meetings. My travel schedule before this year was crazy, and so I wasn't able to go, but I have enjoyed participating in the meetings through Zoom.
Thank you, Lilia. Those are your questions. Dymond Bush, you're next. You are very active in your DAR chapter. How can we encourage members to a higher degree of activism in their chapters?
One thing I found as regent that works is connecting DAR members' like personal interests with different work in the DAR. So for example, in our chapter, we have a couple of people who work in IT. So like they're working on developing the website for us. So just connecting people with their interests.
Do you play tennis?
So I used to play tennis. I played in high school. I haven't played much recently.
What was your most surprising genealogical find?
So I think first would be finding out I had Revolutionary War Patriots, but unrelated to the DAR or the revolution. Was finding out that my 5th great grandfather was born in Brazil, because I didn't realize I would have an immigrant ancestor.
If you could travel to just 3 locations, what would they be?
So I try to visit areas where my ancestors are from. So it would be Brazil, Mozambique, and Ghana.
You are a millennial. How does that affect your experience with the DAR, or does it make any difference?
I don't think that it's really made a difference. I would say one thing is that since I'm a junior member, I've been able to page and meet a lot of different women through paging at different conferences.
Thank you. Stephanie, you're next. What kind of service does your supported living coaches, personal supports, and life skills business offer?
We provide services to people with disabilities. So with Support Living Coach, they help with keeping their benefits, Medicaid benefits, Social Security. They also help them with doctor's appointments. They help them with their budgeting, their bills, to keep them independent as much as they can. Now the personal supports is more of a hands-on service where they help to assist with cooking, help them with their activities of daily living. The companion is more hands-on too, where they take them out into the community and be part of the community, going to the stores, to the malls, to like sometimes they go on cruises together. It's giving the person with disability to be able to be out in the community, become independent.
How did COVID-19 affect your business and your clients?
Fortunately, none of our clients have got the COVID. So we haven't been hurt as much, other than scheduling time for the safety of the patient, of the client. We might cut down on visiting the client so that we don't bring from the outside, bring it to them from the inside.
Where have you traveled most recently?
Most recently, I went to Europe. I went to Italy and Amsterdam.
You were a Navy brat as a child. Which of the places in which you lived left you with the strongest memories, and why?
The strongest memory for me was in Great Lakes, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. That's where I actually started my elementary school, from kindergarten to 3rd grade. So that was very informational for me.
Have any of your children or other family members joined the DAR, SAR, meaning Sons of the American Revolution, or Children of the American Revolution, CAR?
As far as my 2 sons, no, but I plan on getting my grandson to join the card.
Have you suggested DAR membership to any of the young women you mentor?
Well, I am the vice president of Keep It Simple Ministries, and that's where we mentor young women. And we had planned for the past year is to have genealogy workshops to get them start to learn who their grandparents or the great grandparents before we get far back to their patriot.
Okay, thank you. Joyce, you're next. What one lesson did you want readers of Graham's Gifts, your book, to take away with them?
Well, I wrote the book so that the children in my family would know their history, know that we can trace our history back to Europe, but in this country to the 1600s. So one thing I've been doing is I have been doing Zoom lessons on the book to church groups and after school programs. And the one thing I'm learning is that our kids need to learn their history. They need to know where they came from. They need to know who their ancestors are. So with the book, I'm hoping to encourage children to begin to learn their own history, to talk to their parents and their grandparents and start to get the information that they need to be able to understand their family's contribution to this country.
What are the criteria for joining the colonial daughters of the 17th century? How many members are there? What is their mission? And how does it differ from the DAR?
So I tried to look up before this call how many members there are. I didn't find that on their website. What group they are, their ancestors held a government office, a mayor, a judge, a commissioner between 1697 and 1699. So I have several on both sides of my family. The Bustles and the Morays both had government offices. One was the first mayor of Philadelphia. The other one was a judge in New Jersey. So again, part of what I'm trying to do is to join these legacy groups to document my family history.
Have you researched your son's ancestry or genealogy?
I have not, but his wife has. So both my son and his wife were both adopted to single parents. So she did a lot of the research to find their birth families.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to the view where you can see all of the panelists now that we've finished rapid fire, and we'll start with the live questions that you've submitted. We'll start with, and again, I didn't explain this, but if there's a question that you really want to have answered that you see that's already been posed in the Q&A, you can do what's called upvote it. So if you click the thumbs up or like it, then that will bring it up to the more likes it has, the higher it comes up on the list. So the first one, I see somebody just upvoted one. So the one that's got the most votes or likes right now is, have you connected with other daughters who have the same patriot, and or have you communicated with others who are from the same lineage via DNA, Ancestry.com, or other means? And I'm assuming we're talking about from your Patriot of Color, since that's the common thread tonight. So have you connected with other daughters who descend from your Patriot of Color, or talked with other people that connect through your same DNA or through Ancestry.com? Does anyone answer that? Has anybody? Yes. Okay. Dymond.
So I did. I connected with two daughters have joined on Michael Anthony's line. So one's in Kentucky and one is in Texas. And I connected with them through a cousin of theirs whose brother joined the SAR. And I found him on Ancestry. So
were they already in the process of joining, or did you tell them about the Revolutionary War ancestor?
One was in the process. So she submitted her application maybe like 2 months after mine. So
what about the other one? Did she already know that they qualified to join the DAR?
She did know. It took a little convincing for her, but eventually she did submit her application. So now she's a member.
Anyone else?
I only have one. I'm the only patriot. I'm the only person of my patriot. Sorry, Sposto, but I have two people listening to this conversation that have submitted their application, two cousins. So they should be members very soon.
Anyone else? Lilia or Stephanie?
So, Shelley Murphy, who many people know, Shelley and I think we have a common ancestor, not a patriot who's Black or mixed race, but through a white father. And I think some of those members of that family were in the Revolutionary War, but they're not the patriot that I trace. but we've been trying to figure that out.
Stephanie, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I have two cousins who are now sons of American Revolution. That's my cousin Dean Henry and Gerald Scott under my Patriot.
Okay,
I
perfect.
will add,
Yeah.
my mom is a member as well. So.
Okay.
So Stephanie, Dean and I are trying to figure out how we're related.
Okay, I'll talk to Dean about that. See?
Yeah.
Okay, next we have a daughter left a chapter near me yesterday after reading about Marian Anderson. Her feeling is that DAR isn't welcoming with members of color. How can DAR and other lineage organizations be more welcoming and do outreach without seeming like they're looking for token non-white members? Who wants to take that?
Okay, so I haven't found that the DAR is unwelcoming. So although the ladies I have met have been very open and I've enjoyed having conversations with them.
You know, I would say I certainly felt welcomed when I began the process of trying to establish my relationship to my Patriot. I found the people at the DAR headquarters very helpful, and I found the people in the chapter that I belong to very welcoming. I'm the one who hasn't been able to participate, but I do think that anytime, I mean, we are pioneers by being a part of this. There obviously are other women of color who were members long before I came in to DAR and who really did pave the way. But I think anytime, as you know, as a Black woman, we're always going to be, there are only going to be a few of us. And I think that we just have to kind of claim the space. And that's how we, you know, we do things, we make ourselves useful. Dymond is in leadership roles, and then you become indispensable. So sometimes you need to be, it's nice to be welcomed, but sometimes you just have to keep moving and some people will come along.
As I mentioned in my interview, that my chapter was very open to me. They invited me into their homes. So I didn't feel not treated because of my color. I didn't feel that I was a token either. I felt they were genuine and accepted me.
Yeah, I would add the same. I felt welcomed and I didn't necessarily feel like a token member when I joined. So.
Right. And I think that's what I've been hearing through the daughter dialogues, and people who've been listening to the oral histories are hearing similar answers from the women that I have been interviewing. And that's a good reason why I started this study, this project, was to show that where we are now as a society and who are these women of color that joined. Why did they join? Who are they? And maybe by the public and non-members listening to these women and their journey to join the society and their experience in the society, hoping that that will show an unbiased opinion of the experience. Of course, there will always be, everyone's an individual, right? This is a society of 180,000 women. So of course there will probably be some experiences that aren't necessarily as welcoming because people are individuals, but systemically as a society, this is what I'm hearing from the other members when I have interviewed them, and possibly through spreading the word about this project, Daughter Dialogues, is a way to help show, again, this is not, again, yes, you run the risk as an organization by having the members of color prominently displayed on brochures. It could seem like, oh, these are just our token members, etc. I've heard that before, but with things like this project and personal stories, possibly we can spread more of what you're hearing today and other positive stories that we've heard. Thank you for that question. All right, then our next question is, have you found any other descendants of your patriot of color? Have you found any others descendants of your patriot of color? Have you discovered where your patriot was born if they are of African descent? So if you have a patriot of African descent, Did you discover where they were actually born? And have you found any other descendants of your patriot of color? Who wants to
No,
take
I mean,
that?
I certainly have because of this. Just to give this brief history, my patriot was in North Carolina. And when North Carolina began to make it very uncomfortable for free people of color after some slave uprisings, a whole settlement of people moved to Indiana. It is a famous settlement, the Roberts settlement. So I have a large extended family. I don't know a lot of them, but I do know some of my cousins, and they also, a few of them are in DAR.
So my patriot was born in New Jersey in February 1742, born enslaved, owned by his grandfather. And so I believe I know his sister. I know there were other people that were living in the household, people of color. I'm doing some research now. There's a story of Dinah from Stenton, who is credited with saving the Stenton mansion. And the research indicates that she's Cyrus's sister.
But you haven't been able to track back to the African continent yet. Is that correct?
No, I do know which boat he was came to this country on. So from the boat, I'm trying to figure out where the boat.
Do you remember the name of
left.
the boat?
Yes, it was called the Kirby.
Do you know from which you said, but you haven't figured out from which country it departed yet?
I'm researching that now.
Okay, Stephanie.
I actually found James Dew's descendant on Ancestry.com. I was looking on a tree and saw my fourth great grandparents, Samuel Pritchett and Serena Pritchett. And she had them on her tree, but she had Serena's surname as Dew, which we didn't have that. We've been searching for years. They were like my roadblock for years. I stopped with them. So I communicated with her and said, how did you come to the conclusion that Serena's last name was Dew? And she was the one who told me, well, Serena's father was a patriot. And she was the one that led me to direction to where I could find the information about him. But she did not become a daughter of the American Revolution. And the reason for that is for the next episode. That's the topic for the next episode.
Okay, perfect. Dymond.
So I actually had a descendant from my patriot reach out to me recently because she discovered the Daughter Dialogues podcast. But as far as like having an African-born patriot, I think my other patriot, Mingo Pollock, was African-born just because of his name. And when I think his widow's pension, they kind of mentioned that he was a very dark-skinned Black man, which they alluded to being African, but I haven't found like where he was born. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next question. Are you aware of DAR members connected to Crispus Attucks? So I will try to start off by saying that Crispus Attucks is not a patriot under which a member can join. And people are going to say, what? Wait, Crispus Attucks was always known as the first Black man that died in the American Revolution. Well, sure, he died for the cause of freedom, but the dates of the American Revolution under which the DAR recognizes starts after Crispus Attucks died. Crispus Attucks died in the Boston Massacre, and DAR celebrated Crispus Attucks and the contributions that he made to the Boston Massacre in a commemoration of the 250th anniversary of the Boston Massacre. That they did this commemoration this March, last March, I should say, March 2020. Does anyone else have anything else to contribute to that? Thank you. Is it worth traveling to the DAR library in Washington, D.C., or is most of the useful information accessible online? Who are the diehard researchers on this phone? Because I'll let the experts answer that.
I guess I can go real quick. I mean,
Okay.
as a librarian, I would say it's always useful to go to the library, but there is a lot of resources online. So
Yes, they do have the GRS, the Genealogy Research System. Is that the name of it? The correct name?
I think so.
Yes, that is online, and a lot of records have been digitized. But DAR is also known as the second largest genealogical library in the United States, behind the Family History Library, the Mormon Library out in Utah. So, and you need to go to the DAR library anyway, because it's the most beautiful space on the planet, with these ley lights in the ceilings that are just awe-inspiring. And that is where the first Continental Congress was held or the beginnings of the Continental Congresses. They were held, meaning the annual national convention for the Daughters of the American Revolution were held in that space. So there's lots, and you can take a tour there and get a docent to explain all of it to you much better than I can. So it's worth the trip just to go. But yes, of course. And I'm seeing some messages in the chat like, yeah, it's closed right now. Okay. Due to everything, the pandemic, the city is closed right now. So don't come right this second. Let things calm down before you come. All
So,
right.
Can I just add to that? 'Cause
Yes.
Dymond, I didn't know you were a librarian, but
Mm.
I have done, as all of us have done, tons of genealogical research. And there is, it's wonderful now that lots of things are digitized and online, but there really is nothing like the experience of touching original documents or being there with somebody who has worked in a library for decades and who knows where things are and can give you hints, and you can dig more deeply. And it's just it's just a good experience to be in that space, as both of you have said.
Right.
yeah.
And due to COVID, that you can't go to the libraries in person, the state archives has a lot of information that's online. Also, Fold 3 has a lot of information online also.
Okay. Next question. Where do we get an application? Joyce and I have the same lineage, and I'm thinking about joining. Good job, Joyce. You're convincing someone. That is from Karen Day Celsi. And
Okay.
someone from the audience has answered. Go to dar.org and click join at the top of the page. Good job, Maureen Holbert, for getting ahead of us and answering that question. That is
Yeah.
correct. So,
Or give me a call, because I've got all the documentation you need.
yes, dar.org, click join, and you will find lots of information, and you'll enter your information. It will be sent to a local chapter, who will then get in touch with you. Next question, if I've found my ancestor on the ancestor list, should I purchase the associated applications and supplementals, or would this be a waste of money? Okay, so I'm not quite sure about this question. Because you don't need to purchase. Oh, in the research, I think you're asking. I thought she meant like pay for her application fee up front. I was like, no, you don't have to pay for it up front. So does anybody want to take that answer?
I would just say, I think you could try to connect with other descendants of that patriot, because they'll probably have the information for you. But the DAR's application is very valuable with all the records you need. So,
I mean, I think Jane Chick was the person who helped me at DAR, and there was no charge. And I think the librarians are really glad to help you if you give them if you can have at least some of the key documentation. You shouldn't have to pay for it, I don't think.
Right. And so, as people are saying in the chat, I see some loyal members that are there. You can work with your chapter, and your chapter registrar will be able to pull some of that information and help you out. And start there. Start by filling out that member interest form on dar.org. A chapter will contact you, connect with the registrar, and the chapter registrar usually very much helps you with these types of questions and the research. Okay. That was a comment there. Next, I am seeking help connecting the dots. I am researching my Marshall ancestors who migrated to Georgia, but know they came from Halifax, North Carolina, and Virginia before that. Some of those Marshalls are DAR and SAR, meaning Sons of the American Revolution members. Based on Y DNA and autosomal DNA, I seem to descend from those Patriot Marshalls, but I haven't found yet my enslaved mentioned in the documents of those marshals. I have not started investigating North Carolina or Virginia yet. Do you have any words of wisdom for connecting those last dots? Did you all get all of that? Come on.
Not there. But for North Carolina and Virginia, that the Paul Hynek book on people of color, patriots of color. I'll look it up and I'll put it in the chat. But Paul Hynek, Heinnegg, has a book that anybody who's doing research in North Carolina and Virginia can often find ancestors. But I'll find that and I'll type it in.
If she already has family members that are in the SAR or the DAR, that's a good place to start because a lot of the documentation is already done. So getting in touch with a chapter and the registrar would help her obtain that documentation that's already been accepted by the DAR.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, that was just a comment. So I don't see any more questions. Does anybody else have a question before we end tonight's dialogue with the Daughters Live? It's your time. The floor is open. And I know that Alelia is looking up that book, aren't you?
That right now. Let's hope. Yeah. So it's freeafricanamericans.com. And it's an amazing book. I mean, if you have relatives in Virginia and North Carolina, it's probably the best place to have ancestors for documentation.
Thank you. That's helpful for me because I'm researching Virginia line. So
I see something in the chat. If it's posed to us, it should be in the Q&A, so I'll know it's for us. But I'll just try to see if we can answer this. How do I find out more information on my Patriot? I am new to the Daughters of the American Revolution. So they already have joined and they want to know more about their ancestor. Do you have any suggestions for her?
The DAR library when it opens, and then the state and local archives. And then a lot of that is online.
Okay.
I would read up on the battles that your Patriot was in, because that lot of the information geared to the battles was geared to your Patriot.
Alelia, can you type? I have a request for you to type in the name of the book into the chat.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. I will do that.
Okay. Of course, our super fan, Ann Tavis, has asked, Risha, are you planning on hosting an in-person get-together for all of us? Party time. And I would love to do that if we were able to fly and be together, because we have people from all over the nation and even internationally that are listening. And I would love to host a grand dialogue with the Daughters Live in-person party. But unfortunately, we can't right now. So that's a great idea for the future, though. I love it. And Deanna McCrae King says that we could all do a fruits and wine tour. And Deanna, if you can, put in the name of your business in the chat, because she is a member of color. And she has a business that does wine and wine tours. And I don't want to mess up your business, Deanna, but it is all historically based, and you were able to take the tours, hear about the historical information, as well as sample wines in the area at her business. But Deanna, please put that in the chat so people can patronize your business. All right. So I think that's all we have. Fruits and roots. Yes. Okay. And Alelia has put the name of the book in the chat. If there's anything else, I think that we are done for this evening. So I want to give you a couple of reminders that, of course, I want you to return next week. Next week will be our 3rd out of 4 in a series of 4 dialogue with the Daughters Live events. Next week, the common thread will be correcting family stories, setting the record straight, and uncovering mistruths and cover-ups. So this is when family stories they've been told many times or documented incorrectly, and the daughters that you will hear from next week have corrected those mistruths and set the record straight. And this will include 96-year-old Del Jupiter, the great Del Jupiter, who is 96 years old. And Stephani, you returned for us, right? Because you set the record straight with James Dew. The Daughter Dialogues podcast will return in February in commemoration of Black History Month. So the first Thursday in February will be a whole new season of Daughter Dialogues in the podcast form. Subscribe to the Daughter Dialogues newsletter. So go to daughterdialogues.com. Scroll down, put in your email address, subscribe so you don't miss anything. You don't miss any updates and what's happening new or notifications of any events. And again, please support us by following us on social media at Daughter Dialogues on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And until next week, thank you everyone for being here. Goodbye.
Thank you, Risha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.